So I wish everyone what's left of the good morning, and I'm very happy to be here in Midreshet. Haven't been here in a long time, so it's exciting for me. And we're going to study the insights of Rav Soloveitchik. I'll explain to you a little bit of background, who he was and when he lived and so forth, to the Hagadah shel Pesach. Rabbi Soloveitchik was born somewhere at the end of the previous century. I mean, probably at around, let's say, 1900 or so. And about 1900, I'm just rounding it out. You can actually Google Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, and you'll probably get the more accurate date of birth. I didn't do that. Question is how to spell Soloveitchik. That's not easy. In any event, so there's many things I can tell you about him. He was a great mashpia, meaning he had a tremendous amount of influence and impact on the Jewish world. He was what we would call a genius amongst geniuses, extremely creative. In fact, if you quoted him in class, you probably got a yell or a scream, because anything that he had already said was old and stale. Everything had to be brand new, like freshly baked bread. It had to just come out of the oven. Even if it was his own Torah, if it's been said, it's old. And he had thousands of students. I myself had the merit of being with him for 5 years. So that's nothing. I mean, guy in the back of the classroom was there for 18 years. And there was just so much to soak up from him. It was just endless. And they say about Hasidim that when they talk about the Rebbe, they tell stories about the Rebbe and what they call Maisim Mopsim, incredible miracles that the Rebbe brought about. I don't have any miracle stories to tell you about Rabbi Soloveitchik, but the miracle of Rabbi Soloveitchik was that, from a perspective of a student, that he could recreate anew every single time. It was just amazing. He was like a spring that produces water constantly. Sometimes we would end a class after 2 hours. An average class was 2-3 hours. And you would say he deserves for that class a PhD. And then he would come back the next day and start from scratch, as if he had not said anything, and rebuild it from the beginning and recreate the whole sugya. It was just an amazing thing to watch. My partner, my chavrusa, was also a bit of a genius. I mean, for those who might know a little bit about America, he won a Westinghouse, which is it's something for high school students, a national competition. Then he went on to MIT, which is a tremendous university up in Boston, where he finished in 3 different areas in order to get his undergraduate degree in 2 years. He used to come, after he finished at MIT, he would come to Rav Soloveitchik's class, and I sat next to him because we were partners in learning, and I knew that Rabbi Soloveitchik was going to call on him to ask him for an answer. Don't worry, girls, I'm not going to call on you, so you don't have to get nervous. And you would see this fellow, his first name is Alan, and he's thinking like at the speed of light. I think he was thinking faster than his mouth. I don't even think he knew exactly what he's going to say. And it came out like, and Rabbi Soloveitchik was like so proud of him that he came up with the answer. And these were the caliber of people who came around. There were like 100 people in the class. Rabbi Soloveitchik would go through the roll call. Can you imagine 100 names on a daily basis? He wanted to get to know you by name. Somehow he couldn't get my name straight. I don't know why. My first name is Azariah, but he would call it Azariah. And this was going on like years and years. So finally, like in year 4, I figured I have a little seniority here in the class. I said, Rebbe, my name is Azariah. Oh, Azariah. Of course, the next day he came in, he called me Azariah again. So it didn't help very much. Now, what we're going to study today is that before every holiday, he would take a break, so to speak, from our regular regiment, and he would speak about the holiday. So when Pesach came around, he would give us a class, maybe even 2 classes about Pesach. And he would try to give us an insight into the Hagadah shel Pesach. So if you have here on page 7, we have, maybe you know the song, it's on the top, bottom right, called Hal Lachma Anya. This is the poor man's bread, which our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. And then we say, let anyone who is hungry come in and eat. In a word, this is an invitation. Does anybody know what mitzvah a person fulfills when he invites a guest to his house? Excellent. Hachnasat orchim. Now, hachnasat orchim, to invite guests, is a great, great mitzvah. And it's really interesting because, you know, we're reading now in the Torah about the building of the, who can help me out here? The Mishkan. The Mishkan is a structure in which we invite the Almighty God to be our guest. And in fact, the law is that when we raise the funds to build a Mishkan, there's no compulsion. We cannot compel a person to come forward with money to pay for the building of the Mishkan. Because the Torah says, at the beginning of Parashas Truma, it says, Mikol ish asher yidvenu libo, tikhu es trumasi. From any person whose heart prompts him, you will receive the contribution. So it's got to be that your heart prompts you to come forward and offer this contribution. And Rav Soloveitchik asked the question, why? You know, we think of Judaism as democratic, but the truth is, if you learn halacha, Judaism is not very democratic. And if a person refuses to fulfill his obligations, there's halacha called kofen el sam ala mitzvahs. We could compel a person for a mitzvah. And it's not pleasant, but eventually we'll get him to do the mitzvah. But when it comes to building the Mishkan, there's no compulsion. We cannot coerce a person to come forward and offer his contribution to build the Mishkan. Rav Soloveitchik asked, why? Why is this mitzvah the exception to all the other commands where we can coerce a person? There's no coercion. The Torah says, "Me'ish asher yidvenu libo," it's got to be your heart that prompts you. So Rav Soloveitchik gave the following simile, a mashal. He said, let's say one of you ladies would have to get a meal for Shabbos, correct? You haven't gotten an invitation. That probably never happened to any of you because they're waiting online to invite you for Shabbos, right? But did you ever have a situation where you needed an invitation? So you have 2 choices now. You could call up that person, the potential host, and you could wait for an invitation. The other possibility is that you show up at that door on Shabbos or whatever it is, and as we say in Yiddish, ich bin du, I'm here. Whether you like it or not, I'm your guest. Obviously, which of the 2 methods are more convenient, more comfortable? The first, I mean, you want to get an invitation. So God says, you know what? I'm not going to coerce myself I'm not going to coerce you to be your guest. If you want me to be your guest, then you have to build the Mishkan, but you have to want me to be close to you. I could be up in the highest spheres, in the Olamas Elyonim, and that's fine, God says. You know, we could have a long-distance relationship. You ladies are probably too young to remember what we called in our youth a long-distance call. Do you remember that? Do you have anybody? You know, what happens is, if let's say I'm in New York and I want to call Chicago, and it's a long distance call. So in those days, you have to get the operator on the phone, and the operator would put through a long distance call. And God says, you know what? We can have a long distance relationship. That's fine. But if you want a closer relationship, you want a more intimate relationship, then invite me into a house that you will build, and you will be my host. But you have to want to do it on your own, because otherwise, I'm not going to say, ich bin du, I'm here, whether you like it or not. I'm not going to compel myself upon you. So this is the great mitzvah of hachnosas orchim, of inviting people to your home. This mitzvah applies on which day of the calendar year? You have 365 choices. Can you choose one day on which you're obligated to invite guests? It's all 365 days. There is not a moment in time, I was just fooling you. There's not a moment in time in which you're exempt from this mitzvah. If you have the wherewithal, you have a house and you have a guest that you can invite, you're obligated to invite that guest. And it's a great mitzvah. It's an amazing mitzvah. And the first person in Jewish history to fulfill that mitzvah was none other than Abraham, together with his wife Sarah. And Chazal say that when the three passers-by came by, Avraham was in the middle of receiving the Almighty. That's called Kabbalas Shechina. The Shechina came to him 3 days after his Milah in order to be Vakachol, in order to give him a good up feeling. And Avraham Avinu said to God, you know what, God, can we take a break a little bit? I have 3 possible archim here. And the Gemara tells us that the acceptance of archim is a mitzvah that supersedes even Kabbalas Pnei Shechina, even accepting a communion with the Almighty. So this is a great mitzvah that applies 365 days of the year. If you have an opportunity to invite a guest, it's a tremendous opportunity. Don't lose out on it. Now, one of you answered that this mitzvah applies on the night of Pesach, but I would deny that. I would fight you tooth and nail. This is not a Pesach mitzvah. This is a mitzvah that applies the whole year round. And Rav Soloveitchik was wondering why on the night of Pesach, we don't find this on Sukkot, we don't find this on Shavuot, we don't find it on Hanukkah or Purim, we don't find an invitation called Dichvin Yesei V'Yechol. Let any person who's in need come and join. Now, ladies, let me ask you another question. Is there anyone here who buys matzah for Pesach? Anybody? By show of hands? You do? Do you get shmura matzah? Get hand shmura matzah. Oh, that's expensive. Oh, that's like, up in the sky. That's very expensive. Now you have a poor person and he can't afford to buy matzah. And you are the host. You have Baruch Hashem, God blessed you. You have plenty of matzah to offer. So you invite someone, you don't even know who's going to come, but an open invitation, anyone who needs to join me and break matzah with me, free of charge. We're not even going to charge you for it. We got plenty of matzah for you. So that matzah is very expensive. And therefore, on the night of Pesach, there are a lot of poor people who are destitute that cannot afford matzah. You want to invite them into your table in order to facilitate their ability to fulfill their mitzvah of what? Of matzah. So Rav Soloveitchik says the following, mind-boggling. He says the following: if you eat matzah on the night of Pesach, and you fail to invite someone, a poor person, who needs your matzah because you have plenty of matzah to spare, then you have not fulfilled your mitzvah of matzah. Did you hear this? You heard it now, but I'm saying, did you hear what I said now? Did it go in? I ate my matzah. No. You didn't fulfill your mitzvah of matzah. And to understand this, we have to understand Hebrew grammar, biblical grammar. When the Torah commands you to eat something, it says yochal. But there's something called reflexive. And that's in the Hebrew grammar called ye'achel. When the Torah commands us to eat matzah, it doesn't say eat the matzah. It says ye'achel. I can write this on the whiteboard if you like. Ye'achel. Do we have any writing material?
Yeah.
Oh, it's on the thing. Which color do you prefer, girls?
Ooh, orange is important.
Definitely the purple.
Everyone in favor of the purple one, raise your hand. We got it, right? Yay or shel. So the Gaon of Vilna, not of Vienna, of Vilna, asked the question, why does the Torah say yay or shel? The Torah should have used the proper grammatical yochal, which is the active form to describe eating. You are commanded to eat matzah. No, yay or shel, the matzah should be eaten in the causative. So the answer is, I have to make sure that others will eat matzah. It's not enough that I eat the matzah. My mitzvah is not a complete fulfillment unless I see to it that others eat matzah. This is the particular chidush, the inside of matzah, that makes matzah unique on the entire, shall we say, constellation of mitzvahs, and it doesn't apply to any other mitzvah. So if I sit in the sukkah on Pesach, on Sukkahs, and I didn't invite you to sit in the sukkah, I still fulfill my mitzvah of sukkah. I may have missed out on the mitzvah of haknos hasorchim, but at least the mitzvah of sukkah I have fulfilled. But not so in the case of matzah. So the opening line in the Hagadah is the invitation to Aniyim to come and participate in our table and eat the matzah. We're going to afford them. We're going to present them and provide them with matzah, and that's our obligation.
So saying this line fulfills your obligation?
Well, I would assume that this line has to come a little bit earlier. You know, the Hagadah placed it here, but you know, on the night of Pesach, it's a little bit late to start inviting guests. You follow me? Hopefully, everyone is set by then. So imagine on the night of the Seder, you're going to open up your door and say, "Hey, anybody out there? You know what I mean? Please come and join me." But sometimes what the Baal Hagadah does is he takes a piece which really applies even before Pesach. I'll prove to you this in a minute. And he attaches it here to the Leil HaSeder. And that's the next piece in Hagadah. Do you see where it says, Kol ditzrich yeseh v'yifsach? Do you see that? Hello? Anybody home?
No, sorry.
No? We're on page 7. We haven't moved from the spot. So it says, Kol ditzrich, I don't know if you use the Havara Sfaradit, yeteh v'yifsach. What does that mean? So forget about the English translation here because it's just going to confuse you. What we're talking about is the Karban Pesach. Right, at the time that we had a Beit HaMikdash, we had to eat the meat of the Karban Pesach on the night of Pesach, at the Seder table. In fact, at that time period, one of the Manishtana of the child's curiosity is, why are we eating roast meat on this night? You know, other nights we eat cooked meat, you know, broiled meat, anything, but now we're eating sli, what's called sli. Anyway, now in order to eat from the Karban Pesach, maybe I'll use the board again, you need what's called minui. What does minui mean? Minui means that you have to be designated together with a group of people, all of whom will bring one lamb together as partners. So we create a partnership through minui. And we gather together a group, let's say we're neighbors, and we're going to take the lamb, the Paschal lamb, and we're going to cut it down into pieces. Each piece will have to be a minimum of a kezayit, an olive size worth, and we're all part of one group. And that group is called a chabura. Now, what happens if you're all alone at the Pesach Seder? There's no chabura. The Rambam writes that you could fulfill the mitzvah of achilas haPesach, of eating the Paschal lamb, even if you're alone, but not preferable. It's what we call b'diavad. It's not lechatchila. Lechatchila means the best way to do it is to make sure that you have at least one other partner to create a chabura at least a group made up of minimum of 2 people. And the Hagadah here is telling us that you better invite someone else to join you in this Pesach. And that's called, in the Aramaic language, called ditzrich. If there's anyone out there who's not part of a chabura, and therefore ditzrich, he needs to join a group, yesei, let him come in, the yifsach, and let him be part of our group so he can eat the korban Pesach. The yifsach is a verb, the noun of which is Pesach, meaning the korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb. Now, it's impossible that this would take place at the night of Pesach, because minui, to be part of a chabura, is a requirement before the shechita, before the slaughtering of the animal, which took place midday on the 14th, minimum of 6 hours earlier than before you could even begin to start the Seder. But the Baal HaGad is telling us, he's admonishing us, you better get yourself a buddy, you better get yourself a partner to join you in the minui if you're all alone. Because the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, in its ideal form, requires that you have a chabura. And this is how Rav Soloveitchik used to introduce the first paragraph of the Hagadah. Now, let me ask you a question. Again, I'm just trying to feel out what you know, what you don't know. We want to remember the Exodus from Egypt, correct? Mm-hmm. And that's what this night of the 15th of Nisan is all about. Do we have a command, a mitzvah, to remember the Exodus from Egypt on any other day or any other night besides the night of Pesach? Excellent. And that's called the mitzvah of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim. Okay, that's abbreviated Yetziat Mitzrayim, Zechirat, right? Remember, right, the redemption. However, on this night of Pesach, we have a special mitzvah. What's that special mitzvah called? It's called Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim.
Were you saying that we always have a mitzvah to remember?
Right, Zechira, the whole year round. Every day and every night. And basically, that mitzvah is incorporated into Kriyat Shema, because in the third of the 3 sections of Kriyat Shema, we end up by saying, Asher Tzotticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. We acknowledge that the Almighty took us out of Mitzrayim. And we do this twice a day in Kriyat Shema, and we fulfill the mitzvah of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim. So Rav Soloveitchik was very confused. He said, wait a minute, if we have a mitzvah to remember Mitzrayim the whole year round, what's the special, unique mitzvah on the night of Pesach of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim? You hear the question? The whole year round we have to remember Mitzrayim. Why do you tell me that on this night? And by the way, you know, the Rambam counts 613 mitzvot, he enumerates them all. And in the counting, he's going to have a special mitzvah for the night of Pesach called Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. And he's going to derive that from a passage in Parshas Bo, in the second of the 5 books of Moses, V'Higadata Lebincha. And that word V'Higadata is the source for the name of what we have in front of us, namely the Hagadah, V'Higadata Hagadah. It's a special mitzvah. Only applies one night of the year. But wait a minute. We have a mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim that applies the whole year. What do you say?
Hi, sorry, I just have a question on
Oh, I was hoping you'd give me an answer.
Yeah.
Maybe your question will lead us to an answer.
Well, no, question is a little confused with the whole like gathering for the Korban Pesach.
Oh, the gathering, the chabura, that kind of clan or group.
Right. I'm still not sure like what's the point of mentioning it right now when it's late.
So that's what I tried to explain, that this introduction to the Hagadah was actually recited much earlier
The whole Hagadah.
Like for example, no, not the whole Haggadah, but this introduction, the introduction called Ha Lachma Anya, which you'll see a paragraph here on the right side of page 7, that was recited. No, it was attached to the Haggadah only because it's an educational process by which we understand how important it is to invite guests and allow them to eat the matzah, how important it is to invite others to join in your chabur, in your group to eat the Korban Pesach. But I have to admit to you that on the night of Pesach, it's a little bit late to start running around looking for guests or looking for someone who's not manui, he's not actually linked up as a partner to a group. So really, this is a mandate or that enjoins us much earlier than Pesach to run around and look for guests and make sure that they have matzah, to run around and look for someone who'll join you in the Korban Pesach.
Is there like, if you're the person, like you're not having your own seder, but you're invited to someone else, does it mean like, how are you fulfilling the mitzvah if someone else is giving you the matzah? You're like the...
Correct. So it means that someone who has the wherewithal to share his matzah is obligated to do so. Other people are destitute. They don't have the funds. They can't. So they want to be a guest at your house and eat your matzah. That's something different. We're talking about someone who has the ability to invite others to eat the matzah. Okay, then? But let's get back to my question. Can anybody answer this question? Why do we need a mitzvah on the night of Pesach of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim if we have a mitzvah the whole year round of Zechiras Mitzrayim? Can anybody answer that? Again, is the question clear? I don't know. I'm looking at the faces here trying to read how many people understood the question? Only one? Oh, you did understand the question. Yeah, why? What? We remember Yitzias Mitzrayim twice a day, the whole year round, 365 days. Yeah.
Telling it can help us teach it to others and continue.
Excellent. Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, what applies the whole year round, says Rav Soloveitchik, is only a private mitzvah. In other words, it only applies to me. I am not obligated to share this information and broadcast it and teach it and transmit it to others. But on this night, which is called the night of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, I am obligated to teach, to transmit. We're going to soon see that the Rambam writes that if you don't have anyone to teach, you got to teach yourself. What does that mean, to teach yourself? How do you teach yourself something? What?
You gotta talk to yourself.
Correct, but how do you talk to yourself? There's a specific way of talking to yourself. Excellent. You have to ask yourself the questions. And not only that, but Rav Soloveitchik is going to claim that when you offer answers to this question, you're not going to offer some stale answers, some classic standard answers that you said last year or the year before. Every year, you're going to be required to try to be mitamek. Litamek means to go deeper and deeper.
During the year, we just have a mitzvah to remember it. On Pesach, we're supposed to say it.
To teach it, to share it with others. And we'll see that the whole night of Pesach is all about pedagogy. And that's why we start the Seder with what's called tibul. What is tibul? Tibul is when you take a vegetable, what do you do with it? You dip it. Now, if you go to a restaurant, for example, not far from here is one of my favorite fish restaurants. I don't get a commission for this. Right? It's called Shirat Hayam. Anyway, the first thing they give you are dips. Yeah, but when they bring out the dips, they bring out bread. They have a wonderful way of preparing pitot with olive oil and garlic. I mean, it's very. I'm getting hungry already. Just thinking about it. I'm quite getting my last chametz before Pesach, before it becomes matzah only. You know what I mean? Anyway, so usually back in the day, and even today, it's probably true. The dips are actually presented or served within the context of a meal. You don't start the meal and you're not even ready for the matzah. In fact, we're probably not going to break bread, meaning matzah, for another hour or maybe 2 hours. It depends how long you allow for the reading of the Hagadah. But it's only after we finish the Hagadah that we wash for matzah. So we're way, way before motzi matzah. We're at the very beginning and we're already dipping. Why are we dipping? What's the answer to that question? Why are we dipping? And the answer is because we want you to ask, why are we dipping? The question itself is the answer. We're trying to arouse the curiosity of the children by showing them that there's some oddities about this night. And that's going to lead them, hopefully, if they're curious enough, to ask the Manishtana. I don't know if they'll get all 4 of the questions of the Manishtana, but at least some of them. They'll figure out, hey, there's something strange going on here this night. And once they ask the question, they set us up for the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, of answering their questions. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know names here.
Like, no, it's okay. My name's
Yeah.
Hagadah, but I always understood the concept of you want to get them to ask questions, but I feel like in modern day culture, every Seder, the kids learn you have to ask these questions, and I feel like it all is very stale. Where it says in the Hagadah, you have to do this, you have to do that. So
I'll be honest with you.
Their curiosity?
In my humble opinion, and I'm not trying to cast aspersion on any school or education or whatever, but your children do not know the answers to the question. If you're lucky, they'll remember the questions. We have a custom in our Seder. Again, it depends on who's at a Seder table, to recite the questions in 4 different languages. Yeah, so we have one young lady who knows Spanish, so she'll ask it in Spanish. We have another young lady who knows Hebrew very well, so she'll ask it in Hebrew. A third who knows it in English. A fourth who knows it in Yiddish. Actually, my wife, her first language was Yiddish, so she'll ask the 4 questions in Yiddish. And that takes us back a century in time. It's really exciting. And the main, this is a major, major part of the Hagadah. Rav Soloveitchik points out that the entire experience of the Hagadah is all about pedagogy. It's all about teaching and transmitting the Torah and understanding the Torah on the deepest level possible. In fact, Rav Soloveitchik had a very fascinating insight. Let's see if I can find it here. On page 16, again, if you have this Hagadah, and you'll see a paragraph in the middle of that page that starts with the word Baruch. Do you see that? Now, Baruch is always the first word in a bracha. And every mitzvah requires a bracha. Just 1 second. I'm sorry, my mistake. Page 12. You see the word Baruch on page 12, the first major paragraph? Okay. Yeah. Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. He translates, blessed is the all. Right, this is an ancient translation. What year was this published? I mean, it does say Chappell College, so it can't be 100 years ago. No, I think it says 1983 by Yeshaya Kolinsky. Wow, Rabbi Kolinsky. I didn't know he.
He's in the picture.
It says photographs.
Oh,
And this.
I see Rabbi Hirschberg. I don't see where's.
So crazy.
Oh, there he is, all the way in the back. Nice. Wow, he was bald even then. Oh, okay. Anyway, so here we have a Hagadah that's 40 years old to the day. Am I right?
Yeah.
My math is not that good. Correct me. 40 years old. So I don't know. It says here all including. I have no clue where he got that from, but I'm sure Rabbi Kolinsky knew what he was talking about. Anyway, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, classic nusach or formulation of a bracha. Now, what mitzvah are we reciting a bracha on? Look at the next line. Baruch shenasan Torah li'amo Yisrael. Which mitzvah is being indicated here as part of this bracha?
Is it significant that makom is used?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I don't know how to answer that right now. I can, again, quote Rav Soloveitchik in a different context, but I'm just asking, just because I'm trying to lead up to a certain point here. What mitzvah are we talking about here? Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, blessed be the Almighty, who has commanded us in what mitzvah?
Learn Torah.
To learn Torah, shenasan Torah li'amo Yisrael. So Rav Soloveitchik asked the obvious question. Every morning we thank the Almighty for giving us Torah. And we recite 1, 2, 3 brachos on the Torah and the Torah study. Why on the night of Pesach are we adding another bracha in which we thank Hashem for giving us the Torah? We've already done that in the morning. Says Rav Soloveitchik, on this night we have a special mitzvah of Talmud Torah. In addition to the universal all year round mitzvah, v'gisa bo yom v'layla, we should be studying the Torah day and night. We have a special mitzvah of studying the Torah on this night. And how do we fulfill this mitzvah? Number one, with questions and answers. The best way of achieving transmission of knowledge in general, and certainly Torah knowledge in particular, is through question and answer. Not only that, there are 4 sons. Why are we interested in 4 sons? So this is a principle. Again, I'm not going to write this on the board if anyone wants to follow me. Chanoch lenar al pi darko, which means that Talmud Torah has to fit the particular needs of the individual. Right? If you take any courses in education, the philosophy of education, this is like the basics. But it comes from here. It comes from the Hagadah. A lot of things in secular knowledge actually have their roots, their origins in Torah knowledge. And in Torah knowledge is a principle which we derive from Shlomo HaMelech, and that's called Chanoch lenar al pi darko. No 2 people are taught in the same way. Everyone receives his own transmission of Torah. And since on this night of Pesach, the main focus, the emphasis here on this night is education, is teaching, is transmitting Torah, then we have to know who we're teaching. And how many different categories does the Baal Hagadah give us? 4 categories. And in each category is a different approach as to how to teach him. The most fascinating approach, by the way, if I'd say so myself, is the She'eno Yodea Lishol. Are you familiar with that? He's the 4th of the 4 sons. And according to Rabbi Karlitsky, he's the one who wits not to ask. Wow. This is English from 40 years ago. Who wits not to ask. Okay. Basically, he doesn't know how to ask. Okay. In simple English. So now, I have a question for you. This, of the 4 sons, doesn't know how to ask a question. And we say that the mitzvah of pedagogy, of teaching, at its ideal, is through question and answer. So what do we do in this case? The child does not have the intellectual capacity, or maybe doesn't have the background and the knowledge to ask a question. So what do? We answer the question without his asking, right? But look at the answer of the Baal Hagadah. What do you do in this case? At psachlo. Ladies, you know anything about Hebrew grammar? And ask a question here. What's strange about the words at psachlo? Or just for that matter, the word at. What do you say?
It's a you.
At. Excellent. It's in the feminine. If you were speaking to a man, you would ask, you would write ata with a hey at the end. Why does the Baal Hagadah choose to use the word at in the feminine?
He wrote that. He wrote that.
Say it again.
He wrote the Hagadah.
The Hagadah is a compilation of probably centuries of Tanoim and Amoraim, of the great scholars over the generations, that at some point in time were compiled into the Hagadah as we have it. But it's really many different authors, all of which were great Talmidei Chacham, great scholars. If you're interested in the history of the Hagadah, there's a rabbi from Har Nof, which is up the block here, who wrote his PhD thesis at Bar Ilan University on the creation of the Hagadah. How did it develop over centuries? An entire PhD thesis.
I have maybe an
It'll come to me in a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it maybe in the feminine because like we learn that the feminine aspect is like the receiving aspect.
Excellent. Beautiful. Again, if you weren't a female, I would get up and shake your hand. Because that's an excellent, excellent answer. Zohar and Nekeva, male and female, in the writings of our rabbis, are representative of a concept, of an abstract concept. Has nothing to do with an individual woman or an individual man. It has to do with the way a union is created between a man and a woman, in which a man is active, so to speak, and a woman is passive. Without going into detail, you can understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Now, in education, here's the question. You can be active as a teacher, and that for sure is required. You can't just be passive. But you can also be passive as a teacher. How can you be passive as a teacher?
Where the children teach you, like they have to, like when instead of you giving the lesson, you kind of hint them and open-ended questions so they give you the answers. Like,
Well,
they're the ones that are
I would
teaching
agree with you at 90%. I just sort of make one little amendation. I would say the following, that the greatest pedagogy is when you can evoke a question from the audience, from the students.
I see what
So
you're
make
saying.
yourself into an ot. Don't be totally, this is one of the great challenges of Jewish education. I'm facing that challenge right now in this classroom because I'm supposed to present to you Rav Soloveitchik's insights into the Hagadah, which already puts me in an active position and makes you passive. But the greatest education is ot. When you're teaching the child, you evoke. I had a Rebbe when I was 14 years old, Rabbi Michael Hecht, may he live and be well till 120. You know him? No? Anyway, Rabbi Michael Hecht, who, by the way, at Yeshiva University heads up the pre-law discipline. Anyway, he was my Rebbe. I was 14 years old. It was like amazing. What he would do is he would present the Gemara to us slowly, step by step. We were 14-year-old little kids, and he said just enough to ask a question or evoke a question. There were 20 hands shot up, and everybody wanted the opportunity to be the first one. There's a 14 I still remember today. That's called ak psachlo. What you do is you evoke the question or the answer from the child. And the greatness of this is that you give that child just enough of a clue without feeding him the answer so that he's going to ask the question or maybe even give you the answer, as you said before. So what is the mitzvah of this night that we call Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim and is so radically different, fundamentally different than Zechira, remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim the whole year round? This night is a mitzvah of what? Of Talmud Torah, of teaching Torah. We're going to make a special bracha. Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. Baruch Asher Nosan Torah L'Yam Yisrael. We're going to thank Hashem for giving us the Torah. And moreover, we're going to teach the Torah relative to the needs or the abilities or the character of each one of our students, and we're going to divide it up into 4 categories. And not only that, it's even more far-reaching. And that is, if you take a look on page 17, okay? This is amazing. Now, on line 5, let's count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can you tell me, I'm just going to test you, what is the last word on line 5 on page 7? Well, I'm saying you're counting 5 lines down from the top of the page.
No, but sometimes different about which paragraph.
Oh, I see. It's called, in this Hagadah, I don't know if you know, it's called Say Ulaman.
Wait, what's the first word of it?
Say,
The entire.
say. I'll say it again. Say. I'm getting sort of, I feel like a parrot. Oh, yeah. Anyway, again, I'm not sure if you give me your Hagadah, it could be it's not. Oh, this is the one?
Yeah.
This one you're using?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see if we can find it. I'm not sure if it'll start with the word say here. Oh, it does start with it. Page 32. You know, in some synagogues, when they announce the pages, they announce it in 3 or 4 different versions, depending upon what chumash you're using. Anyway, so that's on page 32. Now, if you look on page 32, I want you to see if you could find a Hebrew word that is the translation of as it says. What's that Hebrew word? Shenemar, exactly. Shenemar, which again, in this old time Hagadah from 40 years ago, is on page 17, line 5. Shenemar. Now, what comes after the Shenemar? Whenever you see the word Shenemar, as it says, then what follows is a passage from the Bible or from Tanakh. So which passage does he quote? Arami Oved Avi. Okay, now this Hagadah is not going to help me much, but where is Arami Oved Avi in the Torah, in the Torah? Where are you going to find it?
Now I'm going down to the time.
Okay, a good guess, but wrong answer. Let me just give you the right answer because we're going to be pressed for time soon.
Okay.
The parsha is called, I'll write it out on the board, and now I'm going to use a different color, just for Mikra Bikurim. Okay? And this is in Parshas Ki Tavo. Anybody know which of the 5 books of Moses Ki Tavo is in? Dvarim. Excellent. The last of the 5. And the Torah tells you that when you bring Bikurim, who can tell me quickly what Bikurim is? Or first fruits. When you bring your first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, you have to recite an entire parsha, an entire section of the Torah, which appears in Ki Tavo, and that's called Arami Oved Avi. Okay? Okay, I don't know if you can read my chicken scratch, but anyway, Arami Oved Avi. So if you look on page 17, you'll see it says Shenemar. What's after Shenemar? Arami Oved Avi. That's a parsha for Mikra Bikurim. Now, Mikra Bikurim is a nice mitzvah. It's counted in the 613. But what does it have to do with the night of Pesach? And the Torah requires that when a person brings his new fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, he recites an entire section that goes through every part of Jewish history, leading up to entering into the land of Israel. So this entire period of Jewish history begins with whom? What's the beginning of Jewish history? Well, even before Yaakov, Avram Avinu. So we're going to go back to Avram. We're going to talk about the Avot. We're going to talk about the, and then we're going to finally culminate in entering into the land. In between, there's an entire section made up of 4 verses that describes Mitzrayim. It describes the servitude, the slavery of Mitzrayim, and the redemption from Mitzrayim. But now I have a very, very tough question for you, which I don't expect you to answer, but if you do, that's great. Are we going to simply recite those psukim verbatim? Or are we going to go beyond that? Obviously, if I'm asking the question, it means we're going to go beyond that. What does it mean to go beyond reading psukim? Okay, so now I have to ask you the question. How many Torahs do we have?
1, 2. I mean, but 1.
2. We have 2.
Oh,
Okay? And they're fundamentally different. One is called Torah Shebechtav, and the other is called Torah Sheba'al Peh. So this is the written Torah, and this is the oral Torah. Now, the oral Torah requires the written Torah requires the oral Torah. What does that mean? You cannot be satisfied with the written Torah, because basically, if you read the Torah, you won't understand it. You need what's called drasha. What does the word drasha mean? I'm not talking about a sermon of given by a rabbi before Musa. Drasha means to interpret the law, to interpret the verses. And this is exactly what we're going to do, says Rav Soloveitchik, on the night of Pesach. Because take a look what happens. If you're on page 17, or what page is it? We said there 32. What did we say? Yeah. So what you'll see is after the word Shenemar, it says Arami Oved Avi Vayered Mitzrayma Vayogar Sham B'Msei Ma'at Vayehi Sham L'Goy Gadul Atzu V'Ra. So we have here a series of verses from the Torah. What comes after that? We go back to the beginning of Vayered Mitzrayma. And we have a paragraph here called Vayered Mitzrayma. Then we go on to Vayogar Sham. And we have a whole paragraph about Vayogar Sham. Then we have a paragraph about Mibsei Ma'at. What are we doing here on this night? Which word on the board that you might have noticed? Drasha. We're going through Drasha, which is what kind of Torah? Torah Shebal Peh. Says Rav Soloveitchik, why are we doing this? And the answer is because this is the night of Talmud Torah. This is the night of the study of Torah. And you cannot study the Torah by reading verses. You've got to interpret those verses. You've got to integrate two Torahs into one, namely Torah Shebechtav together with Torah Shebal Peh. And that's what we're going to do on this night. The night of Pesach is all about Torah. It's all about the study of Torah. In fact, if we go back to the Chacham, again, you'll have to tell me what page it's on in the art school Hagadah, but here in Rabbi Kolinsky's Hagadah, it's on page 12. 28. What do we answer the Chacham? Afa Torah or Merlo ki hilchot HaPesach. Which word do I want to emphasize? Hilchot. Do you see that word hilchot? Wait a minute. Halacha? On the night of Pesach, we're going to study halacha? Maybe we should take out a Mishnah Berurah, or if you're a Sfaradi, Yalkut Yosef, or I don't know, Ben Ish Chai, I don't know what. We get many halachic compendiums. Is this the appropriate involvement or dedication on this night to study halacha? The answer is yes. Absolutely. Because there's no such thing as studying Torah without halacha. And again, we're going to look for any halachot that are relevant to the night of Pesach, like, for example, Afikoman, which, by the way, has to do with the Korban Pesach, and we're going to teach it. Again, we're not going to teach it to the other three sons because they're not ready for that. But the Chacham, who's asking the question, Ma Eidut Vachukim Mishpatim, he doesn't understand. We're sitting here at the Seder table and we're eating roast meat? Like, give it a break. Like, what's this all about? But he knows how to classify the mitzvot. He's got one category called Eidut, another category called Chukim, a third category called Mishpatim. This is a very incisive young man who really understands that the mitzvot are divided up into categories. Such a person we can learn halachot with. We can study halacha. And Rav Soloveitchik finds a very somewhat obscure source called the Tosefta. And the Tosefta tells us that on the night of Pesach, we should be studying halacha. Maybe I'll find it for you just to read it to you. Again, it won't be here in the Hagadah, but a lot of what Rav Soloveitchik said about the Hagadah came from other sources. Listen to this. Again, I'll read it in the Hebrew and then I'll try to translate it. Okay? This is a source called the Mechilta. The Mechilta goes back to the time of the Tanoim, like the time of the Mishnah. And the Mechilta says the following: Rabbi Eliezer Omer, a statement of Rabbi Eliezer, Minayin, how do we know? Shem Haisa Chabura, if the group at the Seder table was Chachamim, Talmidim, they were students of Torah, Shetzrichim Lasok Behilchas HaPesach, they should be studying the laws of Pesach Ad Chatzot, until midnight. And this he derives from the pasuk that we read earlier, Eidut. On this night we have to study Hilchot HaPesach. This, to me, as a student of Rav Soloveitchik, was the most radical thing I heard from him. I couldn't believe it. He's telling me that on this night of Pesach, I should be learning Hilchot HaPesach up until Chatzot Laila. Now let's take a look at Maisa Rebbe Elazar and see if we can understand what's going on over here. Now, where's Maisa Rebbe Elazar? Let's see. Here it is on page 10. Again, you'll have to tell me what page it's on in the art scroll. Does anybody see that word Masa? Okay. Yeah.
I just have a quick question, Joe.
I got a little confused when you mentioned the habikurim, like bringing the fruits. So
Right.
what did that have to do with this pasuk?
Because when a person brings his bikurim, he has to go through in his recitation of Mikra Bikurim all the history of how our forefathers went down to Mitzrayim,
Right.
and they were a small group over there, and all the different nuances about Mitzrayim are there in a very compact way in 4 verses in Parshas Ki Tavo.
And so those are the 4 verses that we expand upon in the Hagadah.
Correct.
Thank you.
Now, again, Rav Soloveitchik has more to say about this. I'll say it very quickly because I want to get back to the mice of the story here on page 10. And Rav Soloveitchik said that, is there any connection between Bikurim and the recitation that's outlined there in Parshas Ki Tavo and the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? And he came up with a fascinating idea. I'm not going to go through all his proofs, but he said that the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim has 2 parts to it. One part is Talmud Torah, as we said before, the study of Torah, and that's a transmission in a pedagogic way. And then there's another dimension to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that is to talk about the miracles and to thank and recognize the greatness, to appreciate the miracles. That's called, in Lashon Kodesh, that's called Hakarat HaTov, meaning I express my gratitude. So Rav Soloveitchik says that on this night, we have to express gratitude for Yetziat Mitzrayim. But we don't know how to do that. We don't know which Torah should be studied on this night in order to achieve an expression of gratitude. We know that it has to be a Torah that's related to Mitzrayim, to Yetziat Mitzrayim, to the redemption. But where in the Torah will I find a fulfillment of expressing thanks for Yetziat Mitzrayim? And what's the answer? Mikra Bikur. When a person brings his first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, he has to express his thanks. He has to recognize and appreciate the great miracles that took place, that God took a nation out of Mitzrayim, brought them into the land of Israel, and now we were able to plant and harvest our crop and bring our fruits to the Beit HaMikdash. So that's called Yalfinan Hasosum Min HaMafurosh. In other words, we look for something that's explicit in the Torah in order to fill in the missing blanks when something is not revealed in the Torah. Ma'asav Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, the Rabbi Tarfa. So how many Tanoim do we have here in this list? Anybody want to take a quick count? Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfa. 5. We got 5 scholars. And where were they? In Bnei Brak. Okay. I have a lot to say about that, but not for now. Anyway, so what were they doing on the night of Pesach? They were fulfilling the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Okay. When does that mitzvah get fulfilled? Now, at some point, I fulfilled my obligation, discharged my duty, and that's it. Now I'm exempt. And what's the answer? Kol Tolayla. They continued speaking about Mitzrayim for the entire night until their students came by and said, you know what? Dawn, it's time for Kriyat Shema. And that's when they terminated Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, on this list, the one person that I want to focus on is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Not just because I like his father's name, which is my name, but because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is of the opinion that basically everything shuts down at Chatzot, at midnight. Why did he come to that conclusion? Because he was of the opinion that the Korban Pesach had to be eaten before Chatzot, before midnight. That's why you may know that in the Hagadah, they'll tell you, I don't know if in this Hagadah, that you have to be very careful to eat the Afikoman, which is the last matzah that we eat as a replacement of the Korban Pesach, which we don't have today. Eat it before midnight. And you see in some calendars, they'll tell you exactly when midnight is, based on the Shos Manios on the calendar. and make sure to eat the afikon before midnight. Anyway, that's all based on Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, because the Korban Pesach had to be eaten before midnight. Now, if Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim means to learn the laws of the mitzvahs of this night, then at what point should that mitzvah be terminated and completed according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? And Chatzot, because at that point there's no longer a mitzvah of Korban Pesach. So if the entire Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim revolves around the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, and we're going to see later on that Rabbi Gamliel says that we have to explain the Korban Pesach because God jumped over the so forth. So therefore, the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim should have terminated at Chatzot. And yet, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was one of the 5 scholars who was involved in Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim Kol Osol Laila. What does it mean? All the way through the night, way past Chatzot, past midnight until the break of dawn.
Is that like assuming that the only reason we tell the story is because of the Korban Pesach? Like it's equating those two things.
So Rav Soloveitchik says the following: there are 2 dimensions to the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. There's one that's pure Talmud Torah, the study of Torah. We have to learn, as we saw before in the Mechilta, the laws of Pesach. That mitzvah could only be fulfilled as long as the mitzvahs that we're learning about apply. Like, for example, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, if you were to learn the laws of Korban Pesach after Chatzos, that would be like learning on the night of Pesach the laws of Purim or Chanukah. I mean, after Chatzos, the Korban Pesach has no relevance anymore. You've already passed the determination. But there's another dimension to Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, and that is to tell the story, to appreciate the miracles. That element of telling the story and thanking Hashem for all the for the redemption, that mitzvah applies throughout the entire night. So although, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, when they got to Chatzos, they stopped learning the laws of Pesach, but they continued the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim as Sipur to study the great miracles that occurred at the time of Yitzias Mitzrayim. Now, the Rambam has something interesting. The Rambam, in the 7th chapter of the Laws of Pesach, tells us about this special mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. And he goes through an entire list of 3 elements that are absolutely critical in Yitzias Mitzrayim, 3 principles that apply to this mitzvah. The first principle is what's called Maschil Bignus Umesayim B'Shvach. Let me explain that. If you take a look on page 14, 14, you'll see the word mitchila in bold print. And we go back to the fact that our forefathers were idol worshippers. Do you see that? And then we have another paragraph that starts also there on page 14. Where is it? I don't see it now. Can somebody help me find it? Avadim hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim. Where's that?
For questions.
Yeah. On page 14. I don't know, for some reason I'm not finding it. 1 second.
It's 26 in the other book.
Okay, so you have to give me the other book. Okay, thanks. I'll give it back. 26. Yeah. How come he doesn't have it here? I must have missed it.
Immediately after the 4 questions.
I don't know. Maybe you can find it for me.
That's the reply to the 4 questions.
Maybe this is an abridged version. I don't know.
Oh yeah, this is. Here.
You found it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was on the wrong page. So let me give this back. So this is called Maskil Bignus. Maskil Bignus means that we start with the down, the thumbs down, we were slaves. Or even if we go back in history, we were idol worshippers. So that's the first requirement that the Rambam has. Then the Rambam goes on and says, "V'hui sheyidrosh me'arami oved ovi ad gmar kol haparsha." So he has to read the parsha of Arami Oved Ovi, which we said came from Kitovo, and he has to darshan the entire parsha. Then he writes, "Hamosif umarich kol hamosif umarich b'drash parsha zu arezeh meshuba." Fine. So these are the three elements. Number one, to begin with gnus, with the negative, and then go to the positive. Number two, to darshan the entire parsha of Arami, and number three, to add and expand as much as possible. Then the Rambam says the following: Udvarim elu kulam, and all that I discussed, that I presented it till now, nikraim. Who can guess what the next word in the Rambam is going to be? I would have expected it to say Nikraim Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim, because the Rambam opens up this chapter by saying Mitzvat Aseh L'Saper B'Yitziat Mitzrayim. But no, the Rambam says Dvarim Elu Kulam Nikraim Hagadah. Why does the Rambam feel compelled to give it a name? The name is Hagadah. Why not just simply call it Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is the Rambam's own formulation when he opens up and presents this mitzvah? So Rav Soloveitchik has an amazing chiddush here. He quotes a pasuk. Maybe you're familiar with this pasuk. Ko tomar lebeit Yaakov v'tagid lebnei Yisrael. That pasuk is addressing, I think it's in Parshas Yisrael, is addressing the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Teach the Torah. But what word does the Torah use? V'tagid, which is an active verb formulated for the noun. What's the noun of tagid? Hagadah. So the Rambam wants to tell us that Talmud Torah requires v'tagid, and therefore the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is Talmud Torah. That's why we understand very well that in Talmud Torah you have to take a parsha in the Torah and learn it with the drasha and the Torah Shebal Peh. And that's why in Talmud Torah, called a Mosif, the more you add, the better, because Talmud Torah is an endless mitzvah. And also, you have to describe the mitzvahs halayla, and you have to explain them. All this is Hagadah. What does Hagadah mean? Hagadah means Talmud Torah. And that's what this mitzvah is all about. And that's why, as we said earlier, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. But in addition to Talmud Torah and learning the halachos, we have another dimension, and that's Sipur HaNisim, to tell the story of the Nisim. Now, I see we have only about 5 minutes left. Is that correct? What time do we end? At 1? Yeah. Okay, so in the next 5 minutes, I want to try to share with you another insight, and we've covered from Rav Soloveitchik's, I would say, probably 50 pages. We covered the first 2 pages. So for the next 48 pages, you'll have to come back again for more. But Avodim hayinu lefaro Mitzrayim. What do we say? Page 9. Avodim hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim. Rav Soloveitchik is bothered by the language here of the Baal Hagadah in contrast to the language of the Bible. So again, we don't have time to go through the entire pasuk inside, but if you want to make a note of it, it's in the 10th chapter of Shmot, and it says, Vayomru Avdei Paro. Now watch this. Avdei Paro are the servants of Paro. What would be the parallel if you were talking about the slavery of the Jewish people? What would it say in Hebrew? It would again say, Hayinu, we were Avdei Paro. The pasuk itself is referring to whom? Which means what? Jews or non-Jews? No. Again, Vayomru Avdei Paro. The servants of Paro said to Paro. That's a reference to to the Mitzrayim, to the Egyptians. Again, we don't have time, but if you have a Chumash Shmot, you could look it up in the 10th chapter of Shmot. But here it doesn't say Avdei Paro. It says Avodim Hayinu Liparo. And you could have shortened it by just say Avdei Paro Hayinu. Why Avodim Hayinu Liparo? We were slaves to Paro. Why not just say we were slaves of Paro? So Rav Soloveitchik says something amazing. Let's say I meet a person. Again, I'm embellishing it in my own way. And I ask him, who are you? And he responds, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a nurse, I'm a trader on the market. What does that mean when I ask a person, who are you? And he tells me I'm a doctor. What does that tell me? Exactly. He identifies himself as a doctor, as if to say the essence of my personality is that I'm a physician. If you say Avdei Paro, that means who are you? You are an Eved LeParo. We can never ever say about the Jewish people, Avdei Paro. You will never ever, says Rav Soloveitchik, find, I don't know how he knows this, but only he can say this. You'll never find the phrase Avdei Paro in reference to the Jewish people, because that would mean that we identify our essence as Avdei Paro. We are not Avdei Paro. Avodim hayinu lefaro. We had a legal, relationship as servants, to Paro, but we were never Avdei Paro. But the nations of the world, and in this case the Egyptians, they would identify themselves as Avdei Paro. Ask them who you are. You are, I am Avdei Paro. That's my entire claim to fame. I'm an Eved to Paro. We would never say that our greatness is because we are an Eved to Paro. Unfortunately, tragically, we are Avodim Liparo, but we're not Avdei Paro. Avdei Paro describes the person. And Rav Soloveitchik quotes a medrash that the Jewish people of Mitzrayim, even when they were under the servitude, the sevel, the terrible suffering, they still believed in the redemption. They had Megillot, they had scrolls that were brought down to Mitzrayim hundreds of years before then, and these scrolls describe the ultimate geula from Mitzrayim, the redemption, and they read these scrolls. They didn't have too much time. Actually, Moshe Rabbeinu negotiated with Paro to give them a little time off on Shabbat, on Saturdays, and what would they do on Shabbat? They would read these Megillot. They would read these scrolls that were handed down over the course of generations, and it gave them that inspiration and that faith and optimism in the ultimate geula. And that's why the women of Israel, they were the most outstanding members of this clan of faith. Rav Soloveitchik points out that when they built the Mishkan and the women came forth to contribute what? The mirrors. And Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to accept the mirrors. Mirrors is something you look in to beautify yourself. It's vanity. Who's the fairest of them all? And Moshe Rabbeinu said, this is not appropriate for the Beit HaMikdash, for the lavers, for the washstands. And Hashem said, no, this is the best gift of them all. Because it was the Jewish women who had faith. And the Chazal say, B'schus noshim tzidkanios nigalu avosei Mitzrayim. It's only in their merit that we were redeemed. Because in that abject slavery and those difficult times, the darkest times in history, they still had faith. They would use these mirrors to beautify themselves and go out to the fields and encourage their husbands and give their husbands a sense of faith, of optimism. Their husbands thought it was all over. This is the end. And it was the Jewish women who believed in the future. They understood that we're not Avdei Paro and will never be Avdei Paro. Our existential identity is always, we are Avdei Hashem. We are servants of Hashem. And the Jewish people are always called in Tanakh Avdei Hashem because that defines our identity. I'll end with a tefillah. Yiratzon, may it be His will that we could fulfill all these great mitzvahs of the night of Pesach, and especially Talmud Torah, and become pedagogues, and transmit to the next generation that faith, that optimism in the ultimate redemption, In Herav Yameinu, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Super
If there's any questions, we're here. I don't know what you have next. Maybe somebody comes in to teach.